But let's start with JJ Watt, because obviously over the last couple days, since he was released on Friday, and I think most of us kind of were preparing for this. If you watched kind of how this thing has played out in Houston the last couple weeks, months, you knew that this was kind of inevitable, and 17.5 million is just insanity. You knew they were going to move on from that at this point with no dead cap hit. So I guess to start off with, I want to get into how serious at this stage everybody feels about the legitimacy of the Bills maybe convincing him to come here.
I think it's very legitimate. As my coworker Kimberly Martin reported earlier today, there's been contact. There is mutual interest. The level of interest there is tough to gauge at this point. There's still a lot of time. There's still a lot of money to be moved around. So can't say that for sure yet. But the Bills are in the running, and it's interesting because Brandon B did verbatim say to us in his end of season press conference, don't expect the splashy moves. Like we're in the shallow end of the pool. We're not diving in off the 30-foot diving board this time around. Like we're no splashy moves. But when a guy like JJ Watt at one of your biggest positional weaknesses becomes available, like you can't help but kick the tires. And so I think that they're doing their due diligence right now.
I would say the same thing. Here's the interesting thing about JJ Watt that I kind of keep talking about is he's such a unique player at a unique point in his career off of what I think is a really unique season for a guy who is off of multiple season-ending injuries. And I think you can look at the season-ending injuries in two ways. Have they slowed him down? I mean, I don't think so. Or have they probably taken 2,500 to 3,000 snaps off of J.J. Watt's current career, meaning does he have some more left in the tank? The guy played 1,000 snaps last season, and there's no Bills defensive line on the roster that played that much. So if he could come in, if you could get J.J. Watt at the number, and I keep saying this basically about every guy the Bills have the ability to re-sign from their own roster or go out and potentially sign, is I got a number for everybody. You could get JJ Watt at 10 million, at 9 million. Yeah, I'm all about JJ Watt, but you want to start talking about 15, 16, something like 17 and a half, like that's being talked about in Cleveland. Like, no, thank you. So I think I got a number for everybody, and if you can find me in a comfortable spot for JJ Watt, I think you have to do your due diligence, and I think they're smart to do it, and I think they're legitimately in the running. I think they're going to be in the running for a lot of free agents in a year to be in the need for 1-year contracts, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. There's going to be a lot of players that become available in these next few weeks, cap casualties. And like you said, signing those 1-year deals. And Watt might be looking for a 2-year deal. But you're right. It's going to come down to the amount of money that he's looking for, how much money he wants on the market. Because if it does get into that $14, $15 million range, I think Brandon Beane will pretty much say we're out at that point. He always has that set point when he goes to negotiate with players. He sticks to that. And at the same time, as appealing as Watt would be, as great of a culture fit as he is, you don't want to be spending that much money on a player that's on the wrong side of 30 when there's some other younger options out there that could be more appealing, that could be had for that $8 to $10 million range that could be here long term.
I was, we watched the reports kind of come out since Friday, and Mary Kay Cabot had a big one yesterday that, there was serious consideration in the Watt camp for Cleveland. And I go back and you see some of the numbers floated by, various different people, what this thing is going to kind of land at. SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti, he on his recent podcast said he's estimating around $12 million is what it's going to probably land on. Nate, you mentioned 2 years, 20 million. That kind of makes a lot of sense. I think I'm right there with you that's kind of the range that you're looking at. But one of the cool things that I saw reported early on in Monday in Peter King's column, he said that from what he's hearing, there might be some flexibility in JJ Watt's camp because of the fact that he does want to compete for a Super Bowl. And I think to get in there, you're going to have to figure this thing out in the right situation. And the money might not be there everywhere. I mean, if you want to go to Tampa Bay this year, to compete for a Super Bowl, you're probably not going to get top dollar. I mean, we already seen like guys like Mike Evans come out and say, hey, if you need some extra money, take it because I want to keep winning. So I think all around here, there's real buy-in. And I think at this stage, one of the other things that I thought popped about Kimberly's report today is that we're at this stage and the Bills being a serious contender, which I think we all kind of thought they should be, but that they should be and that they are sometimes in the past have been different conversations. And I think that goes to show that the success that they've had this year is real, and that the effects of that are kind of pertinating or percolating around the league.
I think if you can get them for like I think if you can get him for like a Mario Addison type deal, like we saw last year, that 3-year around $30 million range, I'd be comfortable with that if I'm a Bills fan. It's something that's team control, that's easy to get out of, like Addison's is, and probably will be this offseason. I think that's right around the wheelhouse. But at the same time, like you see you're seeing a lot of fans chattering on Twitter. Let's release this guy. Let's get away from him. You got to remember that this defensive line was already so retooled last year. I'm not sure we're going to see that much different of an offseason than what there was in 2020. So I don't know if you want to do too much tinkering, too much, retooling, too many additions and subtractions. But you got to remember, in order to afford a guy like J.J. Watt, you're going to have to let go. You're going to have to clear out some space. And a lot of that space, a lot of those clearable contracts are on the defensive line.
I think Matt's point about the timing of this is really the interesting part. Is we know that J.J. Watt's going to have the opportunity to sign before the official free agency period starts. That's a huge advantage for him, but it can also be a really big disadvantage for the team that ultimately signs J.J. Watt, especially if they're a team like Green Bay, they're a team like Buffalo that are contending teams with tight cap situations that might have better opportunities to sign 1-year deals for younger guys that are looking to get to the 2022 offseason. And maybe you don't get those opportunities if you sign a JJ Watt in March, especially early on or at the end of February here. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways you can kind of figure out what they do this offseason. But I'm going to tell you what, you can cut off a whole bunch of scenarios if the Bills go after JJ Watt, even at a number that they like 10 million. That's going to really limit them. To Brandon Beane's point, he wasn't probably planning on handing out $10 million a year to someone this offseason. To Marcel's point, this is a unique one. So if you get the opportunity, now you're talking about, do we sacrifice other positions? Are we going to sacrifice the potential short-term health of our or the long-term health of our salary cap, which we know in coming years are really good situations, to try to win now? I think there's arguments to be made on both sides. But the good news is, like, Brandon Beane has set his cap situation up where if he wants to get risky, he can, and he can hedge his bets. And, Les Snead can't hedge any more bets. And I think you're seeing the same ramifications in Atlanta, and you're seeing them in New Orleans. The Bills aren't in that situation, but they could be if they get a little too risky with future cap situations.
Yeah, going back to what you said about signing a guy before free agency, look at last year what the Bills did with Josh Norman. I think that if you go and look at what some of the cornerbacks signed for in free agency later on compared to what the Bills shelled out to him, they probably overpaid a little bit for his services. So you could end up overpaying when there could be someone that hits the market here come free agency, or again, one of these younger targets, a Carl Lawson, 32 quarterback hits, 25, 26 years old. Romeo Okwara, quietest 10-sack season of the year last year of all these potential free agents, in my opinion. So there's younger guys that maybe you can actually have in that $8 to $10 million range that might end up being a better value deal based on overspending now before free agency begins.
I'm wondering too, like, how much sense Watt specifically makes for the Bills. And I bring that up only because there are going to be other options. And, one of them kind of popped, yesterday with, when the Carolina Panthers released Kawan Short. And I know all of us are sitting here with the side eye, like, of course, the Carolina connection, it makes sense. But I think he's one guy that I feel like that the dudes that really had success in that world, under Sean McDermott in Carolina, those are the guys that I feel like this regime really kind of covets. I think it's the reason they did probably overpay for Josh Norman. But I guess, like, if you go out and get JJ Watt, to your point, Nate, you kind of limit what you're able to do elsewhere. Even a low money deal like Kawan Short might command. I want to ask you, Marcel, you covered him when you were on the last year on the beat in Carolina. What were your impressions of him? And I guess, what would he add at 32, and how much more might that make sense targeting him than getting in maybe a bidding war. Not that they can even, but for Watt.
I think it's clear that, especially after last season, that Buffalo needs help on its interior defensive line. And I think Star Lulele's absence impacts that. And I think his return is going to help alleviate some of that. But if you can get a high quality player like Juan Short, they love veteran presence in the locker room. They love leadership. By all accounts, KK Short is a leader in the locker room. He's an accomplished player. I know he's been battling injuries over the past couple of years, but the move, more or less, it makes sense. And it falls into Brandon Beane's, it kind of falls into his MO. Now, would I rather have him? Would I get rid of Vernon Butler and go sign Kawan Short? Probably not. Would I get rid of Vincent or Quentin Jefferson and sign Kawan Short? I'm not sure. You got to show me the numbers. I don't know if he's that much of an improvement over anybody on this defensive line. It just really all depends on the figure. Because if he's going to come in and command, like Ryan was saying, if he's going to come in and command a type of deal that like Josh Norman paid for, if they're going to come in and overpay for Kawan Short, then no, you're making another mistake. You're letting familiarity cloud your judgment here. But if you can get him for a cheap deal after you clear out some of these, maybe overpaid contracts off the current books, then again, why not do something in the short term? Do something that's easy to get out of. He's probably going to be looking, he's going to be looking for work. I don't know if teams are going to be banging down his door after a couple injury riddled seasons back to back. But a veteran guy, used to the scheme, fills a need. Again, go kick the tires.
I think he's a really interesting, figure. Is he a really interesting, prospect that I think is someone that you can rely on maybe outside of a one-year deal? Probably not. If you could figure out the 1 year deal scenario with him, and maybe I think you're like your point about the timing of a Kawan Short deal. For me, the timing of a Kawan Short deal is at the end of the free agency process, where maybe to your point, he's struck out elsewhere, and maybe you can get a Kawan Short at a $2 million 1 year deal, $3 million kind of deal. Then that's something I'm willing to consider for him. But I kind of go back to the idea of, with JJ Watt, and if you have to pay him 12 or 13 million, and I look at it from this perspective, and I know Brandon Beane will look at it from this light, but he may override the decision and say having a JJ Watt might mean, listen, I don't mean to be corny about this, but I think they really missed Lorenzo Alexander's kind of just overall presence, that really veteran leader. And I think JJ Watt comes in and is in the leadership council the day he walks into the building. He commands that type of attention. He's earned that kind of right, no matter where he goes, even if it's in Tampa Bay with Tom Brady. That's just the type of player that he is. But what if you could find a way to get Jadeveon Clowney, Ryan Kerrigan, and Jason Verrett, and have two starters and a rotational player, and potentially a guy in Jadeveon Clowney that you could get on a 1 year deal, and maybe he revives his entire career in value and makes bank in 2022, but you got 1 year of really great value. So if you look at it from that perspective, if you can spread that money over three players that maybe you're not going to have long-term interest in, but you don't really have long-term interest in JJ Watt either. This is what we're talking about, guys, is a luxury that, I've being a fan of the team and then now covering, and I know Ryan and Matt and Marcel, you're fairly new to the beat, but this isn't a conversation we're typically talking about. The Bills in a window to load some interesting veteran contracts for a Super Bowl run, not a wild card run. And so they're going to command attention from free agents that are looking to win. And maybe value winning in a year where contracts might be tougher to come by. So it's a really unique position at a unique time to be respected, and the Bills are respected. And that's such a huge advantage for them to choose between a JJ Watt or multiple other good veteran options that feel like they could go to you and replenish their value on the market. That's a huge advantage for the Bills.